Welcome back to episode 5 of Spider-Man Origins, which is a fan-made origin story for Peter B. Parker from Into the Spider-Verse, and this one is titled The Awakening. Episode 5 begins with a scene of Peter at his house eating breakfast alongside Aunt May, and up to this point we haven't gotten a lot of one-on-one scenes with the two, but throughout the process of becoming Spider-Man, Aunt May has always been Peter's emotional anchor. Although he doesn't tell her anything about his life as Spider-Man, he always comes back to her whenever he needs someone to talk to. Aunt May is always there for him, and that is one of the main factors that has allowed him to balance his two lives up to this point. However, in this scene, Aunt May tells Peter that she's recently gotten a job at the Feast homeless shelter to help those in need and to help pay for housing expenses. The scene then cuts to a shot of Harry, who is already on his way to Peter's house. We soon see him come across Mary Jane, who lives on the same street as Peter, and we get to see Anna Watson saying goodbye to her niece before the two bump into each other. They've obviously both seen each other before, but haven't talked too much in the past, and Harry tells MJ that he was just on his way to meet up and walk to school with Peter, and asks her if she'd like to join. The two begin walking in the direction of Peter's house together farther down the street, and with both of them being fairly social people, they have no trouble making conversation and begin to form a small friendship. When they reach the Parker household, Peter can be seen coming out the front door, but when he spots MJ, he hesitates for a moment before Harry gives him the nod, and he awkwardly walks over to join the two. In this scene, we get to see Harry giving Peter the chance to do something he knows he wants to, but doesn't entirely have the confidence for. With Harry being there, less pressure is put on Peter to communicate with MJ, giving him the chance to actually be himself in front of her. On their walk to school, the three grow much closer to each other, and this is also the beginning of a friendship that will be explored later on. When they get to school, Flash and Randy are seen talking to each other inside, and throughout the last couple of episodes, obvious hints have been given pointing toward the Chameleon having used Randy's body to get closer to Peter and ultimately retrieve the sensitive footage of the incident at Oscorp. This is because the Chameleon knew that he had to choose someone that would allow him to learn more about his target while still keeping his cover. By taking the form of Randy rather than someone closer to Peter like Aunt May, the Chameleon was able to avoid the trouble of having to stay in character at all times, as Peter didn't already have a close relationship with him. And Randy's best friend, Flash, was also too oblivious to notice any change. The Chameleon always seems to be one step ahead of his targets, and this is an example of him cleverly selecting an unpredictable victim to impersonate for a longer period of time as opposed to his usual spur-of-the-moment quick switches. Randy typically goes with the flow, which in most cases is whatever Flash is doing, and he isn't a very deep character, so now that he's no longer involved in criminal-based activities, he's essentially written out of the main story to portray a background character instead. Later in the school day, we get another scene of the trio, Peter, MJ, and Harry, and that's what I'm going to start calling them, and they're at a table eating lunch together. At one point, Flash attempts to break them up by joining in and sharing some embarrassing stories about Peter, and Harry steps in and tells him off. Past episodes have also hinted toward Flash having a small crush on MJ, and in this scene we get to see him carelessly go about trying to impress her at the expense of others' self-dignity. Flash continues to tease Peter, and although he's no longer hurt by the things Flash says, MJ still tries to stand up for him and asks Flash to stop bullying other people. Flash decides to leave the trio alone, and Peter then tells MJ that he had thought she and him were a thing. MJ quickly clears things up, telling Peter that she had just wanted to make the best of the situation, referring back to the lab scene in episode 3. On the other end of town, we get a scene with an angry Doc Ock who seems to be up to no good. The scene is set in the same abandoned warehouse from the third episode, and we hear the doctor telling himself that he never wanted things to be like this. He mentions that the mechanical arm experiment was initially intended to be something to improve lives, but has instead resulted in himself being permanently cursed. With Otto now permanently attached to these arms, he's no longer able to live a normal life, as he can barely fit inside of an average-sized room. They're obviously very uncomfortable as well, which is something the team would have worked on later, but for the initial experiment, it was more important to get the functionality down. Otto now blames Dr. Connors for the situation, as it was he who convinced Otto to be the person to try on and test the arms for the first time in front of the students. However, at the heart of it, Connors is just a selfless man who wanted his longtime friend and science partner to be the first to try their new invention and have the chance to steal the spotlight in front of the crowd. We hear Otto tell himself that he needs to find Kurt and get him to undo the damage he's done, as we can visually see the arms tell him that Dr. Connors sabotaged the experiment. The arms seem to have a mind of their own, and because of this, Otto's ideas are very conflicted, with half of his mind telling him that everything was just an accident, while the other half places the blame onto someone else. The shot then cuts to a scene of Kurt Connors, who's seen in his own personal lab after being fired by Norman. In the background of the shot, a container of rats can be seen, along with a couple of microscopes and a plethora of vials and syringes sitting around the room. Obviously, his new lab is nothing like what he had at Oscorp, but we can still see him trying to continue the research that he's dedicated so much of his life toward. We soon hear the voice of a woman call out for dinner before Kurt leaves the lab to greet his wife, Martha, and his son, Billy, at the table. The family proceeds to have dinner before we get a short scene of Aunt May helping out at the feast shelter, where for the first time after Uncle Ben's death, she finally feels that she has a purpose. The shot then cuts to Peter on his way home from school, and when he gets inside, the house is empty, and he soon realizes that Aunt May is still out at work. Peter feels slightly guilty and that he could be doing more to support the family, and decides to head out as Spider-Man to potentially earn some extra money from the Bugle. As Peter's swinging across the city, he soon spots a large figure leaping from building to building. This figure can easily be identified as Otto by the audience, but to Spider-Man, it looks as if a large mechanized villain is terrorizing the city. Otto has no intentions of hurting civilians, but his eagerness to succeed is causing him to push aside the fact that large pieces of debris are falling off the buildings as he makes contact and are endangering the lives of civilians down below. Spider-Man heads toward the doctor, soon realizing who it is and putting the pieces together. He asks him what he wants and tries to calm him down, but the arms continue to tell Otto that it was Connor's fault and that the masked man in front of him is trying to prevent him from getting what he wants. Shortly after, the two engage in battle, beginning with a blow from Doc Ock. The fight is soon brought to the streets of New York, and eventually Otto comes out on top as Spider-Man realizes he can't beat this new threat and is forced to retreat. About an hour later, we get a scene on the other end of town as Peter is submitting the footage of his battle with Doc Ock to the Daily Bugle, and later when he returns home, he's excited to see Aunt May and gives her a big hug. She's slightly confused as to why Peter is so happy to see her, but chooses to cherish the moment anyway. He asks her how her first day was, and she tells Peter that she really enjoyed it, and May has always been the type of person who feels the need for usefulness, and with Peter not being home as often due to him being Spider-Man, Feast is a nice change of pace for her. At the homeless shelter, May is able to help people in need while being paid to do it. This will not only help her pay bills, but will also supply her with a feeling of importance. We then cut to a scene of Doc Ock on top of a building, and by now the arms have altered his thoughts quite largely, and he is determined to seek revenge on Curt Connors. Otto is unaware that Curt was fired while he was in a coma and still believes that he works at Oscorp. He then decides that he will go to Oscorp to find and threaten the doctor the next morning for the damage he believes was caused by Curt. At this point, his motive is no longer to remove the arms, but to instead hurt the man who he believes is at fault for the disaster. In the final scene of the episode, we get a TV news report from the Daily Bugle, and with this being the modern age, newspapers aren't the only way that the Bugle communicates to its audience. Jonah can be seen alongside some footage of Doc Ock battling Spider-Man with the help of 4 mechanized arms attached to his back, and on the bottom corner of the screen, fine print states that the footage was recorded by Peter Parker. Jonah tells the audience that New York's newest hero has been identified as the genius Otto Octavius, and as Jonah continues to praise Otto, he then asks the question, where did he get the arms and what was Spider-Man doing that needed to be stopped? The shot slowly zooms out from the TV as we see Norman standing inside his mansion on the upper floors of Oscorp. He walks over to his desk and dials a number on his phone before telling the person on the other end of the line that he needs his help, saying that the incident with Octavius has gone too far and that this time he needs him to stop and kill the doctor for good. The screen then cuts to a shot of a man in a dim room wearing a white mask and a dark blue suit who responds with the words, "I'm in." But anyway, that is going to do it for episode 5 of Spider-Man Origins. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all in the next one. I'm out.